In the fall of 1943, as Allied forces advanced north from Sicily, the Italian fascists, desperate and cornered, began evacuating their secret camps. In a secluded compound, 180 prisoners sat quietly inside cold, bleak barracks, waiting for the unknown. From beyond the thin walls, they heard it, the familiar, terrifying rumble of an approaching train. The prisoners feared it was another transport that would take them away, possibly forever. The sound of the train's wheels groaning and brakes screeching pierced the tense silence in the Basilicata region of southern Italy. At the Pistichi camp, the guards noticed nothing unusual. It seemed like any other civilian train pulling in. The train came to a sudden stop. For a moment, there was complete silence. Inside that train, a man who had once lived a life of crime but was now a soldier, checked his weapon. Another, an aristocrat skilled in operating locomotives, listened carefully for any noise or sign of trouble. A former tank commander, once disgraced, focused on steadying his breath. They were 80 kilometers deep behind enemy lines. Somehow, they had stolen an entire train, and their real mission was just beginning. Back in the summer of 1943, after Sicily fell to Allied forces, the invasion of mainland Italy began. The push into Axis territory was bold, but the fight was far from simple. German forces held strong, determined to resist at every turn. The mountainous landscape became a grueling battlefield. Each Allied move had to be carefully planned. During this time, the British Special Air Service, or SAS, became crucial. On September 9th, just 6 days after the first troops entered Italy, SAS units landed in Taranto. They specialized in operating behind enemy lines, sabotaging supplies, cutting off communications, and helping civilians caught in the middle of war. With Italy's surrender approaching, the SAS took on a new mission: rescuing Allied prisoners. While most still didn't know the full horrors of Nazi concentration camps, there was one secret camp that urgently needed attention. Word of it came from a Yugoslav prisoner named Željko. He had escaped from a little-known camp in southern Italy, hidden in the Basilicata region. At Pistichi, he had suffered for months alongside Jews, resistance fighters, intellectuals, artists, and priests. The Nazis had taken over the camp and used it to hold prisoners captured after occupying Italy. When they began transferring those prisoners, many of them Jews and fighters, Željko realized the danger. He had to warn someone. Knowing the camp's routines, he managed to slip past the guards under cover of night and made his way through enemy territory toward Allied forces. By the time he arrived at the Allied lines, he was weak, starving, and nearly collapsing. But he brought a critical message. The Pistichi camp was being emptied. The prisoners would be sent to their deaths unless something was done. Željko described the camp's hidden location, the guards' routines, and the horrors he had seen. He pleaded with the SAS to act quickly. The camp's commandant, a ruthless Italian fascist colonel, had kept its existence a tightly held secret. But now, thanks to Željko's escape, the Allies knew. There was no time to lose. Leading the mission was Major Oswald Cary Elwes. He was known for being decisive, experienced, and determined. His background was aristocratic, and his military training at Sandhurst had prepared him well. But it was David Sterling, the SAS founder, who recognized Cary Elwes's true value and recruited him for the kind of unconventional warfare the unit was built for. Cary Elwes's quick thinking and creative problem-solving made him ideal for such missions. One surprising skill stood out. He could drive trains. As he later explained, learning to operate locomotives was something they had been trained to do in the SAS. This unusual talent would be key to saving the prisoners. Cary Elwes wouldn't be going alone. He was joined by fighters from the French Foreign Legion, including Raymond Queroud, also known as Captain Jack William Raymond Lee. Queroud had once been a gangster, then a legionnaire, then a resistance fighter. He had already survived the brutal raid on Saint-Nazaire in 1942, where he was shot twice in both legs and left for dead. After recovering, he was brought into the SAS by Colonel Bill Sterling, David's older brother. Couraud had become known for his daring missions, rescuing Jewish families and leading sabotage efforts in Nazi-occupied France. By 1943, he had officially joined the SAS, bringing unmatched courage and knowledge to the team. Couraud's experience made him the perfect leader for the French fighters assisting in the mission. His understanding of sabotage and logistics would be essential for hijacking the train that would carry the prisoners to safety. Another key member of the team was Charles "Charlie" Hackney, a man haunted by his past and hoping for redemption. As a tank commander in North Africa, he had survived 2 deadly attacks, each time losing his entire crew. After the second, broken and emotionally drained, he refused to return to combat. He was arrested and faced a court-martial for desertion, which could have meant execution. While Hackney sat in a prison cell in the desert, Cary Elwes came to him with an offer: join the SAS or face the consequences. Hackney, still unsure but desperate for a way out, agreed. He packed up and traveled over 1,500 kilometers from North Africa to Europe. This mission could be his chance to redeem himself. His battlefield experience and strategic mind would play a vital role in what was to come. Together, Cary Elwes, Couraud, and Hackney made up an unlikely but capable team. A regular raid wouldn't be enough. Everyone knew that. So they decided to steal a train. The Italian railway network was extensive, but it had its vulnerabilities. The Pistichi concentration camp was located 80 kilometers behind enemy lines, and the Nazis had plans to transfer its prisoners to Germany, showing that they maintained firm control over the railways. However, the train wasn't just a means of infiltration. It would also serve as a rescue vehicle to transport 180 prisoners back to Allied lines after being freed from Nazi control. The planning required precision. Smuggling 50 men behind enemy lines had to be done with complete secrecy. Couraud arranged safe houses and secure passages for the Commandos, while Cary Elwes made sure the train route remained unobstructed. Each part of the operation was tightly connected. The French resistance had to maintain their positions, the Commandos had to move unnoticed, and the train had to be brought back without drawing attention from enemy patrols. Everything was set for September 12th at Chiatona Station, 20 kilometers west of Taranto. The Commandos and the French resistance had already taken their positions, hiding in the shadows. Cary Elwes observed the tracks, going over every element of the plan in his mind. The turns, the switches, the checkpoints. The team was ready. The sound of the train approaching made tensions rise. Hackney kept watch for any signs that they had been discovered. A quiet stir spread among the group as the rumble of the locomotive grew louder. When the moment was right, Hackney signaled the attack, working in coordination with the French fighters. In a flash, the Commandos stormed the platform and charged the guards stationed nearby. The French resistance moved swiftly, securing the exits around the train. Cary Elwes was the first to get aboard, slipping into the conductor's cabin and taking control. But just as the train was ready to roll out, he stepped off to lead a separate patrol made up of Willys MB Jeeps. Fast, rugged vehicles, perfect for deep strikes behind enemy lines. These Jeeps were loaded with firepower, including twin Vickers machine guns, 50 caliber Brownings, Bren guns, Tommy guns, grenades, and explosives, ready to hit key crossroads before the train arrived. The train began to move, its wheels grinding loudly on the tracks. Commandos and resistance fighters rushed to the rear cars, forcing the last guards to surrender. The train was now under their full control. On September 13th, 1943, the train carrying SAS troops and French Foreign Legion fighters departed from Chiatona and pushed west into enemy-held territory. The 80-kilometer journey to Pistichi was filled with danger. Enemy patrols were everywhere, and Hackney had the critical job of keeping the train moving and in communication with SAS units positioned further along the route. The terrain made things harder: tight curves, steep grades, and the constant fear of being discovered. Despite the risks, the team pressed on. Hackney handled each challenge calmly, keeping his eyes on the surroundings for any enemy presence. There was no room for error. Everything had to go exactly as planned, with every second counting. Finally, on September 14th, the train approached the outskirts of Pisticci. The guards at the prison were at their posts, trying to stay alert through the monotony, watching what seemed to be just another Italian commuter train rolling toward them. They had seen it all before. Italian trains came and went, and the guards weren't particularly alert when they saw one approaching the camp. As Lewis later recounted, the guards saw the train and thought nothing of it. There was no reason for suspicion. But then the doors burst open, and what followed was unlike anything they could have expected. Commandos poured out of the train, weapons raised, charging into the camp in a sudden and brutal assault. The guards didn't even have time to react. Some were taken down before they could draw their weapons. Others tried to resist, but were overwhelmed instantly. The attackers moved too quickly, and the element of surprise was on their side. In moments, the guards were subdued, unable to mount any meaningful defense. Inside the camp, the prisoners were disoriented. Many were frail, malnourished, and emotionally broken. The sound of gunfire, shouting, and rapid movement sent them into confusion. At first, they weren't sure what was happening. Some feared it might be another cruel trick, but the commandos quickly worked to calm them, reassuring them that they were being rescued. The camp fell into chaos as the rescuers moved through with precision and speed. Cary Elwes led the push through the buildings, clearing out the barracks and pressing the remaining guards back. Corrad and Hackney worked alongside the team, ensuring that no one was left behind and that the prisoners were safely moved. The remaining Nazi soldiers inside the camp, caught off guard and outgunned, were desperate, but resistance was hopeless. The attack had shattered their defense. As Cary Elwes and Corrad approached the commandant's office, the camp's colonel was attempting to organize a last-ditch response, but he was too late. The door burst open, and before he could escape, Corrad grabbed him and dragged him back inside. With the camp secured, the focus shifted to getting the prisoners out. This was no easy task. Many of the prisoners could barely walk, and some had to be carried. Hackney coordinated the evacuation with urgency, knowing that every moment increased the risk of discovery by Axis forces. The team moved fast, guiding the prisoners to the waiting train. Hackney did everything he could to keep their route clear and undetected as they began the dangerous journey back. The return was filled with tension. Axis patrols had been alerted, and the train could easily be spotted. The tracks that had provided such a swift entrance now posed a risk, but the commandos pressed on, the train hurtling through the night as the men on board hoped they would make it out alive. And somehow, they did. The train reached Allied territory, and the mission was a success. The prisoners were free, the enemy commandant captured, and the operation stood as one of the boldest in the SAS's history. But almost no one knew about it. The British government decided to keep the mission secret. They didn't want to reveal that Italy had been operating concentration camps, fearing it would complicate post-war diplomacy and portray Italy too harshly just as it was switching sides in the conflict. Keeping the story quiet was also a way to manage surrender efforts. If the public learned about the horrors of Italy's camps, it might inflame hatred and reduce the chances of Axis troops giving up without a fight. Diplomatically, it helped create a more acceptable version of events in which Italy was seen as liberated rather than as a partner of the Nazis. Even after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen in 1945 and the exposure of other camps, the Pisticci raid remained unacknowledged. The commandos who took part were never honored for their actions. Lewis later noted that no medals were awarded, even though the mission had all the elements of extraordinary heroism. Joseph Cary Elwes, the man who led the mission, continued his military service without official recognition for what he had done. Raymond Courreau, who had once been a gangster and later fought with the French resistance, kept working with the SAS. His daring role in the raid left out of the record. Charles Hackney, who had risked his life to guide the train and protect the prisoners, never received formal credit for his bravery. It wasn't until decades later, through the efforts of determined historians and the slow declassification of documents, that the full story began to come to light. Finally, in 2023, Damian Lewis brought the mission into public view with his book, SAS, Forged in Hell. Reflecting on the story, Lewis noted that it sounded like something out of a Hollywood film, so daring, so unlikely, but every word of it was true.